Good morning. How are you? It's good to be here with you again and sharing a little bit about what I learned, I guess, and what were the challenges for me too, right? When you start to study, uh, the challenge is not only for the people that you write for; it's also for you. Um, Actually, the first time that when I just remember this, but the first time that when I wrote a thesis in Chile, back home, my first degree in philosophy, I was writing, by the way, about Paul, the problem of sin on Paul. Why? Because in philosophy I was writing about the problem of evil. And one afternoon, I just started to cry. It was a very deep experience, a spiritual experience. Just writing a thesis. Can you imagine? For a secular university. It was just weird. But yeah, that problem, the problem of evil, the problem of sin in the world, yeah, touched me deeply that day. Um, I would like to start with one story um, from Chile. This is one of the stories that I know of a people. It finished well, but we know that sometimes stories uh, don't finish well, right? I know about a man who was an alcoholic. He lived with his mom. His mom, sorry, with his mother, and his mother attend a little church in a neighborhood, and he care after his mother, look after his mother, you know, and well, after a while, his mother passed away, um, and he fell and fell and fell deep in that addiction. After a while, he started to attend the same community that his mother did. Sometime drunk, he just arrived. It's like this community, right? And we can ask, right? What we will do if a drunk man enter this space, right? Well, the community accept him. Sometimes they serve a coffee afterwards. Sometimes they give food. They couldn't give him money, right? Because you know when a person have an addiction, you can't give money, right? But the community accept him. After a while, I knew that the pastor started to meet with him once a week. Once a week, meet with him. They have supper each week. They pray together. And sometime, that person, that man, changed. I don't know how, but the person changed. He left the alcohol, started to attend the church more regularly. He started to attend the study Bibles, the service. And actually, I knew just last year, I think, that the congregation give the responsibility to be the clerk of the church. What I wanted to start with that story, because I don't know if we believe that the gospel of Jesus transform the life of people. I don't know if we still believe that. I probably we need that too, right? For our life. But I don't know if we really, really and deeply believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ changed life. And I can tell you a bunch of other stories. Probably you know a lot of them, right? Probably you can even tell your own story here and say, wow, Jesus did this with me, right? And my question is, where this community, Willowlake, or the church in general, fit in the mission of God, right? And what is the mission of our church? Taking that point, right? That is starting point. What is our mission? And I would like to point, I guess this is working. No. The next one, please. Thank you. That is easy. Yeah. But, for example, we never, and this is what I learned, that we cannot stop thinking that mission is our framework as a church. But not only as we think mission in the past, that means to send people abroad, right? I know that 3 girls are going to Africa. And that is good, because that will teach us about how we should contextualize the gospel. But my question is, what about here? What is our mission here too, right? And in that way, my proposal was to say that if mission is primarily a task of God, we participate as a church in the mission of God. Therefore, we are a missional church, always as a framework. Not only as a project, not only as an activity, but as an essential part of what we do. And there are some quotes there that I would like to read with you about the same idea. This was written last, probably in the 19th, about what the mission of the church means. More and more Christians of all churches have come to recognize that a church that is not the church in mission is not a church at all. This is a fair quote that I want to point out. The second is, this dimension of the Christian faith mission is not an optional extra. Christianity is missionary by its very nature, or its very raison d'etre. The ser. We say in Spanish the ser. In English is the very reason of being, right? Yeah. But this mission is incarnational. This mission is incarnational, which means and this is the passage, right? This mission is incarnational. That is what we learn from the passage that I select. We can choose many other passages, right? Many other passages, but I choose this because it's one of the most famous about what incarnation means, right? I would like to point in the text a couple of themes that are very important in these 4 aspects that the church should do, right? First, in verse, if you have your Bible, Philippians 2, first, Paul says that the church, or we, are united with Christ, or in Christ, and in love. That is very, very essential. Sharing in one spirit. And that is interesting because the Greek word there is koinonia. I don't know if you have ever heard that word, koinonia, the idea of being together and deeply in love. But it's also fellowship, it's also partnership. Is a deeply, and we are sharing in the spirit in that way. Koinonia pneumatikos, for the ones that love Greek words. That is what the text says. But also in one mind. And this is important because some people say, well, and then in the church we should, when we do mission or when we do our stuff, we should think in the same way, all of us. And you will say, well, no, right? But in this case, it's more a practical mind. The word there, in Greek too, is more the practical mind, not just the theoretical one. Some people like knowledge and think, but in this case, the word is more related to that, to practical stuff, right? And then in verse 5, if you notice there, in verse 5, it says, having the same mind, again, but in this case, the NIV, I have the NIV here, it says, having the same mindset. That is more correctly the translation. It's the same mindset. We think under the same pattern. That doesn't mean that we always agree in the same issues, right? But we have at least the same mindset. And what is the mindset? Jesus Christ is the center. This triune God that is in mission and doing something here in life. And that is the communion that we build. We build a communion on that idea, right? And on that mindset. And that is the reason why we are the church in 4 ways. A community based on love and that communion. But communion is not only about us. It's the communion too about, as I said, the word koinonia is about us having community with God. It's vertical, but also horizontal, right? Without one, there is no the other. And real people. I would like to point out, we are real people. We are not perfect. I don't know you, but I'm not. And we, as a church, are not, sometimes we try to present ourselves as, we are the example, but we are just people that struggle sometimes with our own problems, right? This is another story. This happened to me one time. I invite to my church the daughters of one of the sisters of our church. And I said to her, do you want to come to the service this Sunday? And she told me, no, the church is full of hypocrites. Hypocrites, right? That is the pronunciation? And my response was, no, that's true. It's true. But there is always a place for another one. She laughed, of course, and because, we all know that we have our weakness, right? We all know that. Here in the church, but also the people outside should know that we all struggle with our own life. There is no perfect person, right? And the difference is that we acknowledge that we need the grace of God and the grace of Jesus, right? And that is the reason. And we know that the church is based on our calling. This is not a social issue. Do you know what I'm trying to say, right? We don't have a partnership like a membership in a social club. The church is based on the calling of God to be the church. That is the church. Second, we worship together. We worship together God, right? We can worship alone, but in the church we worship more properly God together. Service. And we do service also in different levels. We do service here at church. Many people work at church, and we have to be willing to serve the church. We serve God. We serve our communities. We serve in our work, right? We serve in different levels. But sometimes what I learned here in Canada, that sometimes the people use a logic of either or. If I do this, I don't do that. It's either or. Yeah? And I'm trying to change that logic and say this and that. Do you know what I mean? Is this and that. Sometimes we should use that logic, right? Yeah, and add something. And finally, witnessing. And that is difficult because we should witness about Christ every time that we can do. Not always with words. Sometimes it's with actions, right? But sometimes we need to speak. And we don't have to, we shouldn't forget that sometimes we should speak. So other no, it's just, I invite you here. Sometimes it's just an action, you know. Sometimes it's just listening, engaging with a person. But sometimes we will have to also speak about Christ to others. I invite you. That is a good expression, right? I invite you. And we don't have to know theology to say that, right? Just, I invite you. Witnessing. Thank you. Then, what is the pattern of our mission as a church? Christ. And Christ, in this order, right? The first two is more willing and is more voluntary in the side of Jesus, and the other one is what God the Father did on Jesus. Preexistence, sending. God is who sent. And that is what also then in John, right? Jesus said to his disciples, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. The idea of sending, right? But in this case, it's the Father, God the Father, who sent Jesus. Self-emptying and humiliation and death. And this is the problem for us because so many times we want affirmation. We want to deny ourselves, right? We live in a culture that is self-affirming, not self-denying. And that is a problem because, for example, then how do we think and power, for example? That is a good question, right? From this perspective, how do we think the power in our society? The power, the politic power even, to do things, right? The people want to know, I will conquer that again. And then and we start with that logic of the conquerors, right? Colonialism. But in this case, the logic is different. And then God the Father rise Jesus from the dead, exalt him, and Trump reign, and finally we expect for his return. Next, please. Then we can see a parallel here in these verses. From 3 to 6, and then verse 4 and 8. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. This is harsh, right? I'm trying to think in myself, not in you, right? But verse 6, it says, though he was Jesus, this is the parallel. He did not think of equally with God as something to cling to, but something that he even self-emptied himself to came here for us, for love. Do you know do you understand the parallel, right? And verse 4 and 8, don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in other too. It could be a great church, right? If we do that, it could be a beautiful, beautiful church. And Jesus also, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal death on the cross. Some comments about this passage. First, the gospel is a powerful and dynamic force. We still believe that here in Canada, in North America. This is a question for us, right? We really believe that the gospel is a powerful and dynamic force in the ways of Jesus, not in the view of our power, right, or view of power. But do you believe that the gospel can change life, even yours? That is what I'm trying to ask you, because that is so important for the task of the church. How the Spirit can transform a still life, can inspire us to have better ideas, even for your life, for your family, for the church, obvious, but even for the future, because we also live for the future, right? It's not just here. Second, the cruciform story of God is to be lived out by the community. The cross is our symbol. We have it here, right? Sometimes in a beautiful shape, but the cross was not so beautiful. The real cross of Christ, right? But that remember also as the love of Christ for us. And the beautiful of that revelation, right? It's not the beautiful of the object, but the beautiful of the love of Christ. And that is important. 3, through becoming the gospel of Christ, the people of God will exercise a kind of magnetism in the surrounding social setting. I remember that probably a month ago, or a little bit more, Pastor Mart told us that the first Christian did that. When all the people escaped from a virus or a disease in some time, they went back and they served there. And that exercised a kind of magnetic attraction, right, for people. Why this guy do that? Why? But believers, are to be a witness community of the Lordship of Jesus Christ by virtue. That means our actions, right? Virtue is it's difficult to explain in a few words, but it's more about habits that became a character and then virtue. It's more what we call in ethic good habits. That is virtue. Good habits. That's all. Deeds and words. Don't forget the words, right? In our society, it's easier to act, right? To serve. I'm serving, I'm doing social work. That is good. But don't forget also that sometimes we will have to witness with words. And finally, this life is characterized by faith, hope, and love. And faith is not only, the Greek at least, is not only that is a mental assent. I believe you, or I believe this. I believe that the sun will rise tomorrow. But it's more also about trust. The Greek word, pistis, is more about also trust, loyalty. Some people, some scholars say allegiance. Faith in Christ is more an engaging task that we do with Christ. Right? It's not just mental. It's with our whole being, person, is completely trusting and devoting to God, to Jesus in this case. Hope for the future, but the question for us is how you incarnate that hope today. What are the signs for hope today, but also how do we incarnate hope today? And love, how we love one another, but also how we love God. Don't forget that part, right? We always sometimes focus in the horizontal part of the love, but don't forget that we love God. And that is the reason why I call this sermon the mission of God and the mission of the church, right? The horizontal part, but also don't forget the vertical. Finally, the last one. To conclude, the revelation of Jesus Christ is not only good and truth, but also beautiful. And we don't have to lose in churches the idea of beauty. I can't explain fully what this means, but in my thesis I devote a complete chapter on this. But the idea of how we can use again the idea of beauty. For example, transformation is beautiful too, but it's also about how we engage with the community at large. For example, here in Winnipeg or in Southdale, right? It's about art, but it's not just about art. We can use art, but it's not just about that. And it's beautiful. It's not just good. It's because sometimes we think that something good is something that, well, I deserve, or something that is practical, because I will get something from that. But beautiful is just something that enraptures me. It's something that compels me to do something. And finally, and this is my last comment, we don't have to be so naive to think that there is no evil in the world, right? Because there is evil in the world. And in this way, God's mission is also a drama. Drama, you know, meet the character, but also the antagonist, and it's drama. And that happened. And we don't have, how I said, we don't have to be so naive to don't see that in the world. And that sometimes has a cost for us, because we have to do that, right? Either in the wrong direction, right? For the culture, I mean, sometimes. And in that way, we are called to jump onto the stage, God's stage, the world, right? And to act, to do something. It's not about to be sitting where you are. It's also to be participant wherever you are, in your work, your family, here at the church. Don't forget the church, because the church is not the building. The church is the people, right, who gather together. We are the church. And please take that we are participating in that mission of God. The question is how Willowlake will do that in the time to come. That is the question that must ask me. I don't know if I answered something, but at least I said what were my reflections. God bless you.